You have helped turn me on to several progressive congressional candidates around the country. It has kind of blown my mind how uh, little in the way of national resources is going to many down ballot candidates around the country in districts that maybe they're not a slam dunk for Democrats, but they should at least be competitive. And it feels like you and I are some of the only people supporting at least some of these candidates.
Where you and I differ, though, is that you have an attitude of, wow, it really blows my mind. I have an attitude of, how fucking dare they? Because there's a reason for what you just said, and that is the corporate democratic machinery that does as much to purge progressive voices on a congressional level and a senatorial level as they do on a presidential level, just like they did with the presidential race this time and they did with the presidential race last time in the Democratic primaries. And so the progressive candidates, and I agree with you, there's some great people, many of whom did not make it through their primaries, some of whom did. But they are not given the support. They often are not the people who already have their own resources. They're not lawyers and business people necessarily. They might be scientists, they might be teachers or whatever. And the money from the Democratic Party is given to those that are what they believe are the candidates who are more likely to win. This is why our friend John Hickenlooper, certainly he was a lovely man, but this is why we have John, who didn't even want to run. We have him rather than the extraordinary Andrew Romanoff in Colorado. It's why we had Sarah Gideon rather than Betsy Sweet. It's why we have Amy McGrath instead of Breuer or Booker. So there's something dark there, and I believe it needs to be named. And I believe that it's the wrong call for the Democratic Party. I don't think that's where the people of the United States are, and it's certainly not where the majority of Democrats are. The majority of people in this country, Andrew, want Medicare for all. When you look at things such as cancellation of college loan debt, when you look at things like universal health care, when you look at things like free college tuition at state colleges and universities, these are very popular ideas. So why are we running a presidential campaign where apparently there's more effort to lure Republicans than there is to please so many Democrats, particularly progressive Democrats? I don't understand it. I don't understand why there weren't more young people at the convention speaking. I don't know why there's not more reaching out. I don't know why the burden is only on them to fall in line. Some of whom I'm very frustrated with as well, don't get me wrong, because I do believe that the most important thing is to remove the fascists from the White House. But I also see on the part of the Democratic Party a pushing away of people who are voters, or at the very least potential voters, and that concerns me very much. It didn't work in 2016, and if they're not careful, it won't work in 2020.
I'm with you on the frustration, and one of the things that I saw work out in the primaries is that if you were progressive running against an incumbent, there were very, very few organizations or figures who will help you. And that's true even if, let's say you're a member of Congress and you're like a dyed-in-the-wool progressive. It's very, very unseemly for you to endorse someone who's primarying one of your current colleagues. Like that, there were some real rules against that in terms of decorum. And so, if you are, let's call it a progressive Democrat running against an incumbent, it staggered me how short the list is of folks who might conceivably get behind you, because Democratic establishment is not going to get behind you unless the incumbent is mired in scandal.
Yeah, but Andrew, it's more than about incumbency. It's about more than incumbency. It's about a viewpoint of the corporate centrist Democrat. It's not just the incumbency. And when it comes to the incumbency issue, there have been some real wins. Look at Cori Bush. She was able to defeat a longtime incumbent. Look at Jamal Bowman, who was able to defeat the longtime incumbent. And of course, that whole trend was started with AOC, who defeated the long-term incumbent. So
Cori Bush in particular.
The race is on.
Cori Bush in particular, because it was in Missouri, and her opponent, I think his name was Lacey Clay, hadn't screwed up in like any mammoth fashion. I mean, I was excited for Cori's victory, but in Missouri, you could see it more clearly in a place like AOC's district or Jamal Bowman's district. But Missouri was an earthquake, The problem is that it is so remarkable, frankly, that you're like, no way, like an incumbent lost to their primary challenger. I looked this up, Marianne, because you know I love math. The incumbent reelection rate is 94%. So if you are going to defeat an incumbent, you're literally, at least statistically, looking at, you know, like a sub 10% chance of victory. And now, having seen the dynamics play out in these races, I understand that more clearly, because no one wants to help you, you know, except for, frankly, someone like you, someone like me, sometimes, like a very, very small handful of organizations, because people are loath to antagonize the incumbent, and getting behind the upstart seems like a bad move, quote unquote, politically, even if you know that that person's in better step with the values of that district or with the American people. And at this point, it's not quite irrelevant, but it's almost irrelevant if the majority of the people are for it.
Well, exactly, and it's totally absurd and naive for us to even pretend that the political parties are seeing as their first job facilitating the voices of the people. They do more to manipulate and to dictate than to facilitate. Look at something like what's happening right now with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is the largest social movement that has ever existed in the United States. And how much of a difference has it made in any legislation whatsoever? The voices of the people, this is what's wrong. The democracy itself is broken. And as far as the incumbency is concerned, it's a club. And the club has many ways of protecting itself and multi-layers of resistance to any penetration and to any change.
Now I'm 100% sure that we need to actually fix the machinery of democracy in order for it to represent the will of the people anymore.
Okay,
and,
so
in part because of what you just described about cash relief. To me, it's obscene that you don't have every single Democrat on board with a version of cash relief instead of the 50 or so that currently are on board.
Thank you. And shouldn't it include Joe Biden?
Yeah,
shouldn't it include Joe and Kamala? That's my point to you. That's my point.
So what we've done is we've actually tried to put pressure on individual members of Congress, say, why aren't you for this bill? Why aren't you for this bill? And we've managed to get a few more, not as many as I'd want.
What are the reasons or excuses that Democrats have given you for why they're not?
Well, I'm like you in that I think many of these members of Congress are just going to do whatever they think is in their political self-interest. So if you say to me, why are they not on this bill? It's because they think it's better for their political self-interest not to be on the bill. So then you say, well, how do you make it so that it's in your political self-interest to be on the bill? And one way to do it for me is for me to say, hey, look, the Yang Gang would like you a lot more if you're on this bill. Oh, and if you're not on this bill, then maybe we will support this person who's going to challenge you. And so those are the kinds of conversations that we have actually been having, and they haven't been as successful as we'd like because people right now do not see that it's in their political self-interest to do what the American people see as obvious, because right now 75% of us think that there should be cash relief during the pandemic. So once again, why is it that you don't just do what everyone knows is common sense and the right thing to do?
I don't know why you think it would make you unpopular to say to people, we're sending you money so you can survive.
Exactly. Like, how is this not a home run for you?
And the same with Medicare for all, though. The same with so many of these issues.
So, to me, I mean, there are so many problems stacked in here. The main problem is that if you are a member of Congress with a 94% success rate at being reelected, you just become this creature of Washington, and you have these consultants around you whose careers depend upon your continued membership in Congress. And so if someone comes and says, hey, like, do this big thing that will, to at least some people in your district, make you seem like, quote unquote, like radical or something along those lines, they have like 5 people who are essentially like their brakes on any kind of move like that, being like, no, like don't embrace this thing. They're like, they have barnacles on them. And the goal has to be that we actually make it so that they see that the water's fine and that if they go this direction, it will help them.
See, that's where you and I separate a little bit. It's called corruption. total and complete corruption. It's not only what you said about their constituents, it's also about the leadership of the party. When Nancy says we're doing this, no, we're not doing that. And even the ones who would agree with us and are playing the long game so they go along. That's exactly what I mean. Now, until that's called for what it is, and when you talk about all of the operatives, yeah, they're circus performers. That's why I call it a campaign industrial complex. It's thicker, darker, and deeper than I feel we're describing in this conversation. And it has nothing to do with a government of, by, and for the people. It's a government of, by, and for the corporate interests that are then
Barnacles.
spending all the money in order to make sure some people win and some other people lose. It's not just the consultants, it's what the consultants are telling them. And so, I don't know why in Congress, unlike in every other profession, we all have to make ethical decisions. You've been in business, you have a career where I'm sure you were called upon to make an ethical decision. I might make more money if I make the unethical decision, but I'm a human being who wants to respect myself, so I'm going to make the ethical decision. I don't know why we give Congress people a pass. Oh, well, he or she can't vote the right way because they'd lose their job. Lose your seat. Have some conscience. Lose your seat. If doing the right thing means you lose your seat, lose your seat. And we need to say that. And we need to call them on that. And we need to get over our delusion that if we just vote blue, it'll all be fixed. I mean, if you look at the bailout, if you look at this bailout, which is so horrifying, as I said, I call it the drop-dead bailout. It's corporate bailout as opposed to people bailout, right? And I know you feel strongly about this.
Yes.
It's really the same template as the bailout in 2008. The bailout in 2008 was corporations versus people. And they just took the same template and they went on steroids. The whole system is that corrupt. And yet the system mitigates against people calling it out on its corruption. And that's why it's going to be an awakening of the American people who vote in such massive numbers for people who are calling it. And what we have are so many people who recognize the corruption, but who feel that their way of resisting is by not voting.
Yeah, understandable.
You have to give people something to vote for. That's the thing. Direct cash relief would be something people would vote for. Medicare for all is something people would vote for. College, cancellation of college loans. Do you know how many people would show up to vote for a presidential candidate who said, I'm going to make your life easier? And I'm sorry, it's not enough to just say, heal the soul of America. How about some policies that's going to make your life easier? It's not enough to just say, we're not Donald Trump.
Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.